There are places in the world where the forest holds secrets, where the land is steeped in stories that never see the light of day. Blackwood Creek, nestled in the remote mountains of Canada, was one such place. Its dense woods seemed to stretch on forever, the trees towering over the small village like silent, watchful guardians. The village itself was small. Only about 200 people lived there, each one known by name, and each one holding a piece of the land's history. It was in this quiet village, where the days blurred together and time seemed to move slower than the river that wound through the forest, that the Carter family lived. Emily Carter was a sweet, curious 8-year-old girl with a wild imagination. She spent her days exploring the woods, her eyes wide with wonder as she ran through the trees, chasing squirrels, or simply watching the river flow endlessly past. Her mother, Susan Carter, often warned her about the dangers of wandering too far into the forest, especially as the cold months of November set in. But Emily was like most young children, unaware of the risks, fearless in her exploration. On November 13, 2010, Emily disappeared. It was a quiet evening, just after the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a deep shade of purple. Susan had asked Emily to return before the dark settled, but Emily had promised to be back soon. But soon wasn't soon enough. When the hours passed, Susan's worry began to grow. By midnight, Susan's husband, John Carter, went looking for their daughter. But despite calling out into the forest, no reply came. The next morning, they called the local sheriff, and soon after, a search party was organized. Volunteers from the village, the sheriff's office, and even a few local hunters set out into the dense, cold woods, hoping to find any trace of Emily. The search went on for days. The woods were silent, with only the sound of the cold wind rustling through the branches. The ground was damp with early frost, making it difficult to leave tracks. But there were no signs of Emily. No broken twigs, no footprints, not even a whisper of movement. The villagers' hope began to dwindle with each passing hour, and by the third day, despair began to set in. Scene 2, The Mysterious Woman. On the third day of the search, something strange happened. At dawn, as the villagers were preparing for another long day of searching, an old woman appeared in the sheriff's office. She was frail, hunched over, with graying hair that cascaded down her shoulders. Her clothes were tattered, and her face seemed to be a map of wrinkles that spoke of years spent living alone in the wilderness. No one recognized her. She had no family in the village, and no one had seen her around before. With slow, trembling steps, the woman walked up to the sheriff and said, almost in a whisper, "I know where she is. The girl is near the river, by the rocks, where the water runs slow." The sheriff didn't know what to make of the woman's words, but with no leads and desperation hanging over the village like a dark cloud, he decided to follow her advice. He gathered a team, and together they made their way toward Blackwood Creek, a place that had become both a lifeline and a mystery to the village. The woman's cryptic statement seemed like the only thread left to follow. The search party made its way to the edge of the creek, where the trees began to thin and the land opened up to the water. It was cold, with a sharp, biting wind cutting through their coats as they walked along the riverbank. The sheriff called out Emily's name, but the only response was the sound of water trickling against the rocks. And then they saw her. There, sitting on a rock at the river's edge, was Emily. She was alone, motionless, her clothes oddly clean and dry despite the cold air and the dampness of the river. Her eyes were wide, and she stared at the flowing water with a gaze that seemed to pierce the world beyond it. The sheriff approached carefully, calling her name softly. "Emily, are you okay?" But she didn't respond. She didn't even move. The only thing she did was look at the water, her expression blank, as if she had no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. After a few moments, Emily's father, John Carter, reached her side. The moment he touched her shoulder, her gaze slowly turned toward him, and for the first time since her disappearance, she spoke. "I was waiting for her," Emily whispered, her voice soft and distant. "She said I had to wait." John felt a chill run through him. Who was she waiting for? The old woman? But the sheriff had seen no one else. No one had been around the creek.